All right, let's dive into something that's honestly a huge deal for anyone building with Next.js. We're talking about a brand new way to handle data mutation in the app router. It's a massive paradigm shift, a real game changer. So let's break it down.
I mean, if you're a developer, you know this pain, right? You just want to update a single record in your database, and suddenly you're neck deep in boilerplate. You're building out an entire API endpoint, writing fetch calls, managing loading and error states. It's just so much work for what should be a simple task. Well, it turns out the team at Next.js has been thinking a lot about this exact problem.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll get our heads around the big new idea. Then we'll dive into what are called server actions. We'll cover how to keep all your data consistent, and of course, how to make the user experience feel amazing. We'll even walk through a real example with an invoice app and wrap up with the big question, when should you use this new stuff?
All right, section 1, the new paradigm. So what's the big idea here? Well, at its core, it's a huge shift back to the server. For years, the trend has been to push everything, and I mean everything, onto the client's browser. Next.js is kind of pumping the brakes and saying, hey, maybe let's bring that critical data logic back home to the server where it's safer, more secure, and honestly, just way more streamlined. Okay, so this whole new model really stands on 3 main pillars. And the key thing to get is that they're designed to work together perfectly, like a well-oiled machine. You've got server actions, which let you run server code right from your components. Then there's cache revalidation, which is crucial for making sure your users don't see old, stale data. And finally, you have client-side hooks that tie it all together for a super smooth user experience. The real magic isn't in any one of these things. It's how they all integrate. Okay, let's kick things off with the absolute star of the show here, server actions. The best way to think about this is as a zero API model. Yeah, you heard that right. It's all about putting your server logic right next to the component that uses it. No more building out a whole separate API layer just for your app's internal needs. So what even are server actions? Well, at the end of the day, they're just asynchronous functions. That's it. But here's the kicker. They are guaranteed to run exclusively on the server. They never ever ship to the client. And what that does is it just abstracts away all that tedious manual work. Setting up API endpoints, writing fetch calls, all of that just vanishes.
So you're probably wondering, how does Next.js know which code to keep on the server? It's almost like magic, but it's actually just one simple line of code, the use server directive. You can pop this at the top of a file or even inside a single function, and that's it. That's the signal to the build system. Hey, this code, it stays here. Don't you dare send it to the browser. It creates this really clear, explicit boundary.
And this gets us to a really key concept. This is not the REST API model we're all used to. This is actually what's called a remote procedure call, or RPC. So instead of your component making a post request to some endpoint like /API/invoices, you're literally just calling a server function as if it were a local function. It feels like it's right there in your component, and Next.js just magically handles all the complicated networking stuff under the hood.
All right, on to our second pillar. Now that we're easily changing data on the server, we run into a new kind of challenge. See, the Next.js App Router is incredibly smart about caching data to make your app super fast. That's awesome, right? But it also means when we change something, we have to find a way to tell that cache, hey, the world has changed, you need to update yourself.
And if you don't do this, you get that classic super frustrating bug. Imagine your user deletes an invoice. The app sends them back to the main invoice list and, bam, the invoice they just deleted is still sitting there, staring them in the face. Why? Because they're looking at an old cached version of the page. Revalidation is the fix. It's what ensures your UI is always in sync with your database. No more stale data.
So how do we do it? Well, Next.js gives us 2 main tools in our toolbox here. The first is revalidatePath. It's simple and direct. You basically just tell it, hey, I changed something that affects this specific page, so go ahead and clear its cache. Then you've got the more powerful tool, revalidateTag. With this, you can put custom tags on different pieces of data when you fetch them. Then, with one command, you can invalidate everything with that tag, no matter where it appears in your app. Super powerful.
Now here's the really clever part. When you call one of these revalidation functions, it doesn't immediately kick off a ton of new database queries. That would be really inefficient. Instead, it just marks the cache data as stale, like putting a little sticky note on it. The fresh data is only actually fetched the next time a user visits that page. This whole concept is called lazy revalidation, and it's a brilliant performance trick to avoid hammering your server for no reason. Okay, so we've got our server logic sorted with server actions. We've got our data consistency handled with revalidation. So what's left? Pillar number 3, making this whole thing feel snappy and responsive for the actual user. And this is where some handy React hooks come in to bridge that gap between the server and the client.
And really, there are 2 key hooks you'll be reaching for. First is useFormStatus. This one is all about giving the user immediate feedback. You know, when they click Submit, you can use this hook to instantly disable the button and show a little loading spinner. The second one, useFormState, is for handling more complex stuff, like if the server sends back validation errors. This hook lets you gracefully take those errors and display them right next to the form fields where they belong.
Okay, quick pro tip here, and this one is super important. A little gotcha that can trip you up. If you're using useFormStatus, the component where you call the hook has to be a child of your form element. You can't just put it in the same component that renders the form. It needs to be nested inside. Just remember that one, it'll save you a headache later.
All right, that's enough theory. Let's get our hands dirty and see how this all works in practice. We're going to walk through a real-world example from the official Next.js dashboard tutorial, creating a brand new invoice. This is where you'll really see how those 3 pillars, actions, revalidation, and hooks, all come together in perfect harmony.
So, check out this workflow. Step 1. The user fills out the invoice form and hits Submit. The form's action attribute points directly to our Create Invoice server action. No onSubmit handler needed. Step 2. That action runs on the server. First thing it does, it validates the data. This is absolutely non-negotiable for security. Step 3. If the data is good, it inserts the record into the database. And finally, Step 4. It calls revalidatePath to clear the cache for the invoice list, and then redirect to send the user back. That's it. A complete, secure, end-to-end flow.
Okay, so seeing all this, it naturally leads to a huge question that I'm sure is on your mind. With server actions being this powerful and easy to use, are traditional API routes basically dead? Do we even need them anymore?
And the answer is a big, resounding no. Absolutely not. API routes are not obsolete, not at all. But their role has definitely changed. It's become much more specific, much more distinct. This isn't a situation where one is better than the other. It's all about picking the right tool for the right job. And this table really lays it all out. Think of it this way. Server actions are for your app's internal business. They're for forms, for CRUD operations, for all the things your Next.js app needs to do for itself. API routes, on the other hand, are for the rest of the world. They're your public-facing door. You use them when you need an endpoint that an external service can hit, like a mobile app, a webhook from another company, or a public API you're offering to other developers.
So really, it all boils down to one simple question. Does something outside of your web application need to call this piece of logic? If the answer is yes, you need an API route. End of story. But if the answer is no, and it's just for your app's own use, then a server action is going to be the simpler, faster, and more secure way to go pretty much every time.
So let's just pull this all together. What have we learned? Well, first, this new server-centric model is a huge win against boilerplate and complexity. Second, those 3 pillars, the actions, the revalidation, and the hooks, they work together to give you this incredibly smooth and secure workflow right out of the box. Third, the big decision, actions versus API routes, it just comes down to that one question, internal or external. And finally, maybe the biggest takeaway is that we're moving away from thinking in terms of API resources and endpoints and shifting to a simpler model of just calling functions.
And that kind of leaves us with one big final question to chew on. This whole thing, it's more than just a cool new feature in Next.js, right? It feels like a fundamentally different way of thinking about how we build web applications. By tying the client and the server together so tightly with this function-oriented model, are we actually looking at the blueprint for the future of all full-stack web development? It's a pretty fascinating thought, isn't it?